Welcome to Food for Thought. Today's episode is everyday horse-related expressions, the obvious and the obscure. Before we begin, my name is Patrick-Goudreau. I am your host. You can find me at joyfulvegan.com and on social media. You can find my books wherever books are sold. You can also buy direct copies from me, including signed copies. You can join me in my online cooking classes or in my all-inclusive vegan trips around the world. This podcast is listener supported, so if it's something you value and you'd like to enjoy some exclusive perks, head over to patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau to become a supporter today at your chosen level. We have some really exciting changes happening over there, so do not hesitate. It is going to be a game changer. Thank you for supporting the podcast. Thank you for subscribing to the podcast, and thank you for listening. Please also leave some ratings and reviews. It really makes a difference. Also, if you'd like to join me for some of the online cooking classes, we've got some great ones coming up, so just go to joyfulvegan.com for that. And while we have a couple spots left for our Rwanda 22 trip, our Joyful Vegan Tuscany and Joyful Vegan Northern Italy trips are both half full already, and they are a year from now, 11 months from now. So head over to joyfulvegantrips.com to look at the description and to book your spot today. And now, before I get too long in the tooth, that was an etymology, let's talk horse. So for those who don't know, an etymology is a term that I coined to reflect an animal-related word or expression. And today we're going to talk about horses. Horses have roamed the planet for over 50 million years. That's humbling. That's humbling because we haven't been around that long. And archaeological evidence indicates that the domestication of the horse took place about 6,000 years ago in the steppe lands north of the Black Sea, in the area around Ukraine and between Ukraine and Kazakhstan. And almost all of the horses alive today are domesticated, and they descend from extinct wild horses. We've talked about this when we've talked about bovines. We've talked about cattle, for instance. We don't have any more wild cattle. The last wild cow was killed in Poland in the 1960s, I think it was. And of course, the wild bovine was the aurochs, and we don't have the aurochs anymore because we hunted them to extinction. And same thing with wild horses. Pretty much all of the wild horses, even the ones we see today, the wild horses in the West who are being round up by the BLM in the United States, the Bureau of Land Management, they really are still descended from domesticated horses, even though they are technically wild and free until they're round up. We will get to issues that horses face in another episode, but today we're going to talk about our expressions. Now, horses were initially kept for meat and milk in that area that we just mentioned. But as they became more domesticated, we humans, of course, found more ways to use them, more uses for them, such as serving as a means of transportation for us. And of course, by virtue of that, as combatants in warfare. We've used them as draft animals to pull heavy loads, as companion animals, and as a source of entertainment in circuses, and of course in horse racing. Now, because of that, because of all of the ways we have used them, but also because of our close proximity to them and our reliance upon them, our relationships with them, our respect for them, we do have an awe for them. I mean, this cognitive dissonance we always talk about. We are in awe of many animals. At the same time, we do things that actually don't reflect that awe, that harm them instead. But because of this close proximity to them, it's no surprise that our language, the English language I'm speaking about, because I speak English, is full of horse-related words and expressions. And I'm talking thousands of words and expressions that are related to horses. Now, we're not going to do thousands in this episode or subsequent episodes because they're just too many to cover. Today, we're focusing on expressions. I am going to do an episode on words, and that's going to be so much fun. I've already mostly written it. So today I wanted to start with expressions. And then, as I said, we'll focus on horse issues, the threats to their well-being, the threats to their welfare, threats to their survival, and what we can do to help. Today, we're talking about expressions that you're mostly familiar with, but many, I think, will surprise you. So let's start with some we know. I'm not going to go over each one and give you the definition because you know what they mean. Most of these expressions, they're idioms, they're metaphors, they're proverbs, they're idiomatic expressions that convey one thing by saying it with something else, right? So we'll get to that. But there's going to be a whole section that I think you're just going to be really blown away by. David, actually, it was really funny. We were in bed the other night and the cats were just running around, and he said, what are they doing? He said, oh, I guess they're just horsing around. And I was like, that's an etymology. I mean, if you spend any time with me, I will confess that I will probably annoy you at some point because we have so many etymologies in our language that there is always a time where you say something and I'll say that was an etymology. And you're like, what? Like horsing around is very obvious, but there are ones that are really hidden. If you haven't listened to any of the etymology episodes, you can go to the etymology podcast. It was a short-lived, limited run podcast, but you can find lots there. And I think I hope it will excite you as much as it excites me because there's so many words in our language that reflects our connection with other animals. So I will point them out if we are having a conversation. Now, some of these expressions I'm about to share are innocuous. Some of them are neutral. Some of them reveal our exploitation of them. Some of them reveal our respect for them. And some of them reveal our violence toward them. And remember, podcast supporters at $10 and above, those are my champions, my super fans, my besties, my heroes, my angels, and my benefactors. They get the podcast transcript. But if you're a bestie, hero, angel, or benefactor, you get today's bonus material. And the bonus material related to this episode is a transcript of my compassionate versions of some of the most violent horse idioms. You've heard me say, instead of no use beating a dead horse, there's no use watering a dead flower. My favorite really at this point is there's no use feeding a fed horse. So those are the kinds of things that are in this transcript and I'm also recording it for you, that you will get at those levels, bestie, hero, angel, or benefactor. And you can see all those levels over at Patreon. So upgrade your support if you want access to this bonus content. And of course, if you want the transcript, which is going to be a lot easier to keep track of all of these idioms and expressions, then just head over to Patreon and at least become a champion. So you'll get the podcast transcripts. So here are some of the expressions you have heard, you probably say all the time. You probably say them several times a day. And they don't really need an explanation, but of course, you can ask me what they mean and what the history is. That will also be included in the bonus material. There's no use beating a dead horse. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Straight from the horse's mouth. Get back on your horse, right? If you fall off, get back on the horse. Get off your high horse, or someone's on their high horse. Don't change horses midstream. Don't put the cart before the horse. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. If something is just a very small town, it's a one-horse town. A horse of a different color. Wild horses couldn't drag it out of me. Hold your horses. Something's large enough to choke a horse. To be as strong as a horse, to work like a horse, or to be a workhorse, to eat like a horse. I could eat a horse. I'm so hungry I could eat a horse is an expression. To have horse sense, to have practical sense is to have horse sense. Horsing around, right? Or horse around, or horseplay. A Trojan horse, it's not an actual horse, but it's still an expression, obviously coming from the Trojan War between the Greeks and the Trojans. It was when the Greeks concealed themselves in the Trojan horse. And so today that expression means anyone who undermines someone to bring out about the downfall of someone else, right? So that's a Trojan horse. There's an expression, don't lock the barn door after the horse has been stolen. Dog and pony show, one trick pony. And of course, we have the pale horse or the pale rider, both being metaphors for death. So these are expressions that have horse in every single one of them, or pony. And they are expressions that are in our really like everyday lexicon. But did you know that These are also horse etymologies, for better or for worse. So let's do some more where they might be a little more hidden. Although as soon as I say them, you're going to go, oh yeah, like, right. Yeah, sure. Okay. So put out to pasture, it means to stop someone working in a job, to force them to retire because they're believed to be too old to be useful. This phrase comes from the fact that tired old horses who were retired from work, mostly draft horses who were used for pulling, and hauling, they were put out to pasture to graze and probably just quietly pass on. So that's how that expression came to refer to humans being forced to retire early. To be long in the tooth, as I started off the episode with, means old. It comes from the fact that animals' teeth, especially those of horses, are thought to be an indicator of age. As animals age, their gums recede and their teeth look longer. So to be long in the tooth is to be rather old. In a lather, the idea of don't get yourself in a lather over this. It means agitated or anxious. And the term alludes to when a horse is sweating and they're exhausted and they're just working really hard. They have like this kind of frothy, sweat. So that's what in a lather refers to, is from a horse, the frothy sweat of a horse. Now, moving on from these general idioms that don't really, they really reflect, kind of the physiology of the horse, to those that come out of horse riding. So expressions that come out of horse riding are to give someone free rein. So if you give free rein to someone, you give them a lot of freedom to do what they want, right? The expression free rein originated as a horseback riding jargon, referring to the act of holding the reins loosely so as to allow the horse to freely move along at his own pace and to go in his desired direction. That's a novelty, right? But of course, if you have a bit in a horse's mouth and you have the reins connected to that bit, you're controlling where that horse goes. If you're giving someone free rein, if you're actually loosening those reins on the horse, you're actually giving them freedom. So that's what it means to give free rein to someone, as you know, but it comes from horse riding. Conversely, if you keep a tight rein on someone, right, you maintain tight control over them. You don't allow them independence or autonomy or freedom. And that alludes to holding on to those reins that are attached to the bit in the horse's mouth to control the horse's movement. So again, that comes from horse riding. To chomp at the bit, right? Speaking of bits, the idea of chomping at the bit, this expression means to be impatient or eager for something to happen. And it's actually a variant of the original phrase was to champ at the bit. But this is one of those examples of our language changing. We don't say champ at the bit, we say chomp at the bit. And it's a reference to an overexcited horse straining against that bit, that big piece of metal in his mouth. It comes from horse riding. To spur on, to be spurred on, and spur of the moment. All of these are expressions from the spur. This is that spiked attachment worn on a rider's boot that is meant to urge a horse into action. So any expression containing the word spur, spur on, to be spurred on, spur to action, spur of the moment, all have to do with the spur that is used to goad a horse to move. Another expression from horse riding, or actually from jousting, is an expression full tilt. If something is at full tilt, it means it's moving fast and forcefully. Tilt is an old synonym for jousting, the practice where two knights on horseback would ride toward each other at full speed and attempt to knock each other off their horses with a long stick, right? That was jousting. And so those knights moving at full speed to race toward one another, that was racing at full tilt, at full speed. That's how we get that expression. To ride roughshod over someone or something, or to run roughshod over someone or something, means to act without restraint, to act without consideration for others' needs or wants or feelings, right? The term ride roughshod over something traces its roots to equine warfare. It was, and still is, common practice to shoe horses, making sure their shoes, the bottom of their feet, were able to traverse slippery terrain. And so they shod, which is a past tense of the verb to shoe, they shod the horses with nails or other metal protuberances on the shoes to make them have traction on the ground. So a horse who was rough-shod is a horse who was shod with horseshoes with the nail heads projecting from the bottom of the shoe. That's what rough-shod means. This gave the horse better traction on slippery ground, but it was also used kind of nefariously. And so cavalry horses were roughshod, and as such became weapons when they were charging against foot soldiers in the field during combat. And so, it's one thing to get trampled by horses if you're on the ground and there's a rider on a horse. But if you are struck by roughshod hooves, it would be far worse. And of course, the horses themselves would sometimes hurt themselves because as they're running, they, could scrape their one leg, when they're running because the bottom of their foot hits their leg. So now I have at least a visual of why running roughshod or riding roughshod over someone means to act without consideration for them, because it really would have hurt if you rode roughshod over someone. So that is roughshod. It's actually from shoeing horses. To be saddled with something means to be forced to deal with a situation or a person that's a great burden. Now, of course, a saddled horse has a burden on his back in the form of a heavy saddle, and of course, a person on top of that saddle. So to be saddled with something is to be weighed down by this burden, weighed down by this difficulty, and it comes from horse riding. To go through the paces, you've heard of that? Putting someone through the paces means to test the ability or skill of a person or a thing. Could be a machine. I'm going to put it through its paces. The expression alludes to testing a horse's ability in the various paces or gaits, like a trot or a canter or a gallop. So you're putting a horse through this test, and that's how it became a figurative expression for people or machines. To show the range of things one is capable of comes from putting a horse through this test, through the paces. Hobson's choice is an expression that might be a little out of date now, but it's worth naming because I do still see it around. I think it's just a little bit more obscure. This is an expression from the mid-17th century, and it means a free choice in which only one thing is actually offered. So it seems like you have a choice, but you really only have one. That's a Hobson's choice. It means it looks like you have multiple choices, but you really only have one. The most well-known Hobson's choice is, I'll give you a choice, take it or leave it, right? And it's like, well, that's not really a choice. So it's named after Thomas Hobson. He was a 17th century livery stable owner in Cambridge in England, and he hired out horses. He had a livery stable, and he would give the customer the choice of the horse near the door or no horse at all. So that's how we get the expression Hobson's choice. If something's a Hobson's choice, we really don't have a choice at all. To feel your oats means to feel energetic or frisky, to feel important, to feel empowered, right? Someone's feeling their oats, like they're just kind of coming into their own. When a horse is fed oats instead of hay or grass that they're accustomed to, they get a burst of energy. It's probably a bunch of, carbohydrates just giving them a burst of energy, and they start galloping around. And they appear to be newly invigorated, and they stride with confidence and purpose. They stand a little taller. They're feeling those oats. They're feeling the oats they ate. And that's what it means for us to feel our oats. We just kind of feel like we're just kind of coming into our own, and we feel a little stronger. We feel a little taller. To feel your oats comes from horses, not necessarily horse riding. That could have actually been in the other section before, where it wasn't necessarily horse riding. To get hitched. This is informal slang, of course, for marrying someone. It's to get hitched. We got hitched. It comes from the practice of tying horses to wagons. So it's a metaphor for, people being tied together, like horses would be tied together to pull a wagon or to pull a farm implement or something like that. Now, the idea is that farmers or people who had wagons, they would only hitch teams of horses together who matched temperaments because they would be pulling together and they had to basically get along. So those horses whose temperaments complemented each other would be tied together to the wagon or the farm implement. And so the idea is that they were compatible. And so that's where we get the expression that we apply to humans, is we got hitched, comes from horses, right? It's wild. Like, did you know that? And maybe you did, but I think it's really, really fun. We also have some expressions, phrases, metaphors that are a bit obscure, but I wanted to share them with you anyway, because you may have heard them. There's one, if wishes were horses, beggars might ride, or if wishes were horses, beggars would ride. And it's a proverbial way of saying that one must work for the things one wants, not merely wish for them to come true. If wishes were horses, beggars would ride. There's one that says to run before one's horse to market. So don't run before one's horse to market. Don't count one's gains prematurely. Horse feathers means rubbish, means nonsense. There's one expression, rode hard and put away wet. I do love the rhythm of that one, but I know it's not it's not the most compassionate idiom, but I love the rhythm of it. Rode hard and put away wet refers to a person who looks worn out or unwell, and it comes from the inadvisable practice of riding a horse and then stabling him while he's still sweaty. He's still wet, he's still sweaty, rather than grooming him properly, because of course it could mean he could get sick, or he could get stiff joints, etc. So that's what that expression means. And we have an expression, to curry favor. To curry favor means to gain favor by flattery or attention. And it's originally from a French poem from the 1300s called Roman de Fauvel, the Romance of Fauvel. And Fauvel was a horse. And the phrase was originally to curry Fauvel. Curry means to comb, right, or to groom. Fauvel was the horse. So I won't get into the details of the story, but basically by currying Fauvel, by combing Fauvel, you were trying to gain his favor. And so eventually curry Fauvel became curry favor. And that means to fawn on someone insincerely or duplicitously. It comes from an old medieval French romance, a medieval romance that was about a horse named Fauvel. And that means that is an etymology. That is a horse-related etymology. There are hundreds and hundreds more horse-related expressions, but we would be here all day if I attempted to list them all. And I wanted to highlight the ones that were the most familiar to you, especially those that have horse in the phrase themselves. And I wanted to also share some that are expressions you say every day, but probably didn't know horses were hidden within. Now, I know it can be unsettling to hear or to realize that the origins of some of these expressions, mostly having to do with riding animals or using them or buying them or selling them or hurting them in one way or another. I know it's not pleasant to hear that, to realize that so many of our expressions come from our use of horses. Now, some are neutral, as you heard, and some are celebratory. And next, I have a category of horse-related expressions that I think is going to blow your mind. They are expressions we use every day that I think you would never guess, in most cases, that come out of horse racing. I think it's going to blow your mind a bit. And I think it's going to be another one of those moments where you go, oh, wow, I say that every day. And I didn't know that's coming from something that I don't really advocate or support or like, right, or want to perpetuate. We all want to make sure, and I advocate for trying to be mindful that the words and expressions we use don't reflect violence or exploitation against animals, right? Which is why I offer the compassionate versions of the most egregious ones. There's no use beating a dead horse. I mean, these are the horse ones. There's obviously so many others, but you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Get back on the horse, get off your high horse. I mean, it's all reflecting that we're sitting on a horse, that we're, riding a horse, using a horse. Don't put the cart before the horse. We're using that horse to haul that cart. I'm so hungry I could eat a horse, right? So those are expressions we can be mindful about and think, oh, maybe there's a better way to say that, where I'm still expressing it metaphorically and playfully, but maybe I don't reflect any harm against a horse. Fine. Okay. So that's what we do. That's what we talk about. But some etymologies are so hidden that it would be awkward or strange or weird to try and switch them up, like the ones I'm about to share with you. So, my intention of sharing them with you, and as always with language, I am never ever saying don't use these expressions. I'm not even saying you have to have compassionate versions of the ones I just named. You might have no problem with any of the things I just said. You may have no problem with riding horses. You may have no problem with the fact that we used them for hauling. That's fine. I am not saying you have to have alternatives. That's exactly what I'm saying. So my intention is to share this with you, to shine a light on how prevalent our use of animals is, in this case, horses, and how prevalent in many ways our relationship with them is, or our relationships with them are. So prevalent. We're so connected to them that our expressions and our words, many of them hidden, are there in our language every day. So I'm here to excavate them. I'm here to unearth this for you so that you can see them and you can look at this, right? Because these are archaeological digs. They really are, because you take it out of the earth, you dust it off, and you go, what? I had no idea this was related to that, and this goes back to that, and what the history is. So that's what we're here to do, is to excavate and examine, and then draw our own conclusions, even if it just means sitting with them for a while. So that's what I'm about to do with this section of horse-related etymologies that have to do with horse racing. So before I amaze you, I want to thank you and my supporters, especially my angels. That's one category of our Patreon supporters, Brooke Boussard and Mikhail Stone. You have been my angels for a very long time, and I'm so grateful for you both. My heroes, Angelica Lofton, Jennifer Statmiller, Jennifer Watkins, Geraldine Hilmar, PJ Schuster, Rajini Mohan, and Tina Strassheim. And today's featured bestie, so those are my angels, my heroes, and today's featured bestie is Melanie Nill. Melanie has been a Patreon supporter for several years at different levels, and today she's at the bestie level, and I'm so grateful for her. She's one of the brightest lights I've ever met, and one of the sweetest, kindest, most adorable people ever. And I know this because not only has Melanie been a loyal supporter, she came to my work by way of the 30-Day Vegan Challenge. She's taken online cooking classes, and she and her husband, Ray, joined us in Northern Italy this year. And what a gift it was to have both of them on the trip with us. I should give a shout out to Ray, because I know that as partners, they are both supporters, but Melanie has listened to every one of my podcast episodes. I think some of them more than once. And my heart is still so full from all of her love and support. I told her, if you remember, Melanie, on the trip, that I was working on some episodes that I thought you would like. I knew she would like, because Melanie volunteers for a nonprofit horse organization in Arizona called the Salt River Wild Horse Management Group, whose mission it is to protect wild horses. So Melanie is a bit of a hero to many, many, many people, many animals, not only mine, not only my bestie, but the bestie of many animals and many horses. You do so much, Melanie. You give so much, and I'm so grateful to you. So thank you. And if you'd like to join Melanie in being a supporter, please head over to patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau if you would like the transcripts and the bonus materials. Choose any level above bestie, and including bestie. You can choose hero, angel, benefactor, etc. So thank you so much in advance. And as I said, some really exciting things are happening over there, and there's just going to be an increase in connection and content for everybody who supports my work. So let's take a look at all the expressions we have from horse racing, a blood sport in which hundreds of horses are killed or injured every single year, both on the track and once they leave the track. And interestingly, many of these expressions from horse racing made their way into politics, which you could say is another kind of blood sport. The only difference is that people have a choice to participate, and still amazingly do. So let's begin. We're going to start with shoe-in. A shoe-in is an easy winner, a certain winner. And it comes from the practice of corrupt jockeys holding their horses back and shooing a pre-selected winner across the finish line to guarantee that they will win, right? So when I say shoe and shoe-in, it's not SHOE, it's shoo, like to shoe a fly. And so that's the idea. The jockey, because there was a fixed race, would hold back their horse and shoe in another horse, another jockey to win. Now, today, a shoe-in is an easy winner, like a candidate or a competitor. Oh, he's a shoe-in. It doesn't imply dishonesty, but that's the original association. That's the origin of that expression. Also ran is a loser in a competition, as in an election, and it originally applied to race horses who didn't finish in the first 3 races. They were called an also ran. Well, we use that expression today to talk about a loser in a competition, and again, especially in politics. A dark horse is someone who achieves unexpected support and success, right? Especially, again, referring to a political candidate, someone who wins and you didn't expect them to win. It's from horse racing, referring to a horse whose racing ability wasn't known and who unexpectedly wins. That's what a dark horse is, coming from horse racing. To pick the wrong horse, to back the wrong horse, that I think is pretty obvious. It means to support a person or an effort that ultimately proves to be unsuccessful or problematic or troublesome. And the reference is to betting on horse races, to back the wrong horse. I think it's pretty obvious connotation there. To win something hands down, right? To win something hands down means to win with little or no effort, and it comes from horse racing. It refers to a jockey's gesture of letting the reins go loose, right? Dropping his hands, like we were saying before, kind of like, loosening the reins, right? Give free rein, and thus relaxing his hold on the reins when victory appears certain. So, I got this, right? They're going to win. And so they just, drop the reins, hands down. That's what it means to win something hands down with little or no effort. Give and take. Give and take is the practice of compromise, right? And it's originally from horse racing. It refers to races in which larger horses were given more weight to carry and lighter ones less. So you give more and you give more weight, you take some off. You give, you take, give and take, give and take. And that's the expression from horse racing. If you jockey for position, if you're jockeying for a position at work, if you're jockeying for a promotion, that comes from racehorsing. And it basically means to maneuver or manipulate for one's own benefit, right? So if you're jockeying for that promotion at work, you might do something that kind of undermines someone else. It doesn't always have to be manipulative, but you're maneuvering things so that you will benefit from it. And it comes from horse racing, where the jockeys would try to get their horses into the best position at the beginning of a horse race. So kind of jockeying for position to get in the best position at the start of the race. To be out of the running or to be in the running, both of these expressions kind of go hand in hand. Figuratively, again, also often used in politics. It's a person or a group of people who are in contention for or out of contention for an award or a victory. And it originally comes from horse racing, referring to the horses who, in the running, are the lead competitors. And those who are out of the running are obviously not. Running mate, another political term that we get from horse racing. It refers to a candidate or a nominee for the lesser of two closely associated political offices. So you have a vice presidential candidate is the running mate of a potential president. And in horse racing, a running mate is a horse used to set the pace in a race for another horse. And it also came to mean, according to the OED, a horse that runs alongside a trotting horse in a double harness, relieving that horse of some of the effort of pulling a load. So that horse would replace the other one. That's what a running mate is, and that's where it comes from. Neck and neck. Right? In general use, it means two or more contestants who are level in a competition, in a race, and it originally refers to horses in horse racing. They are neck and neck before one wins. Down to the wire means something that's determined at the very last minute, and it's from horse racing. So you run neck and neck, and then the winner, it's going to come down to the wire. The wire refers to actual wire. It's actual steel wire strung high above the horses' heads so that the officials can decide which horse came under the wire first. In the case where two or more horses seem to have finished at the same time, right? They're neck and neck, the race is declared a photo finish. A photo finish from horse racing means to win by a very slight amount. And it comes from this idea that they couldn't see, if they couldn't tell who came under the wire first, then they needed a photo finish. And the photo finish accurately determines when the horses hit the finish line. This developed in the late 1930s, where there was where strip cameras were used for these photo finishes. Prior to that, there were like high-speed motion picture cameras were used, but it didn't provide the accuracy. So then they started using other cameras. And now we have a photo finish, and we use that metaphorically. It's from racehorsing. Run for one's money, a run for one's money. To give someone a run for their money means to give them a challenge. And this term originated in horse racing around 1839. To want a run for your money is to want a horse you have placed a bet on to participate in that race, right? You want a run, you want that horse to run for the money you have placed on him to win. Sometimes a horse is withdrawn from a race after the bettors have already placed money on that horse. And so those bettors did not get a run for their money. So that's the origin of giving someone a run for their money. Horses for courses is a figurative expression meaning that different people are suited to different things or different situations. It's mostly a British expression, urging someone to stick to the thing that he knows best, right? It comes from the horse racing world, where it's widely assumed that some horses race better on certain courses than on others. Horses for courses. Track record. Metaphorically speaking, a track record is a record of past performance, often taken as an indicator of likely future performance. The term comes from horse racing, where it is defined as the best time a horse ever made over a given distance on a particular track. So that's their track record. So the best time that horse makes over time, over a given distance on a particular track, that's their track record. Hot to trot describes someone who's eager to do something, most often someone who's eager to have sex. That is kind of how it's used. It's used a little more generally, but still some people kind of think about it in sexual terms. So hot to trot comes from horse racing, referring to a horse who is eager to break out of the starting gate during a race. Hell-bent for leather means as fast as possible. Hell-bent is one expression, but hell-bent for leather is another one, and that has to do with horses and horse racing and horses, and it refers to the leather in the saddle or the leather in the crop used to incentivize, I'm using that in quotes, force the poor horse to run. So the more you hit the horse with the crop, with the leather, or the more you're just, in that saddle forcing that horse to ride, you're hell-bent for leather comes from horse riding, horse racing. And finally, home stretch or home straight in the UK. So home stretch is what we usually say in the US, home straight in the UK. It's the last part of something that's being done, right? It's taken 9 months to build and design my new website. That's a real statement, but we're in the home stretch now. We're on the home stretch. Either one is appropriate. So we're in the home stretch, right? While the home stretch is that part of a race course between the last curve and the winning post, it could refer to foot races in which people compete. So you can still think about a stretch on a race course that could be people racing, right? Foot races, but it primarily comes from horse racing, and that's why I'm including it here. So to be in the home stretch or the home straight comes from horse racing. As I said, it's no surprise that we have so many horse-related expressions, especially considering how many thousands of years they have been by our side or underneath us or under a load that we have given them, mostly because we have domesticated them to work for us, to haul for us, to carry for us, to compete for us, and as I said earlier, to be eaten by us. But that's a horse of a different color. See what I did there? We will have more to say about all of those ways in which we could do better by horses in a subsequent episode. Next up, we will be unearthing all of the horse-related words in the English language. There are scores of them. And I think you might be relieved to know that they're not all about our use of them. The expressions really, I think, reflect our use and exploitation of horses. But our words, we have so many words. Going to blow your mind. Many of them very positive, some of them neutral, many of them very positive. And many of these words reflect our admiration for and our respect for horses. So I hope you'll listen to that episode. For now, I hope you have good enough old-fashioned horse sense, see what I did there, to subscribe to Food for Thought. And if you haven't become a supporter yet, stop horsing around, go over to Patreon and choose your level of support for the animals, for the horses. This is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thanks for listening.